The morning Jake refused breakfast, I knew we'd crossed into dangerous territory. I'd finished a double shift at the hospital, 12 hours of beeping monitors and other people's emergencies, and came home to silence that felt like a warning. My son sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, staring at the wall like it had personally offended him. Daniel stood by the stove, spatula in hand, attempting cheerfulness. He'd made pancakes. Jake's favorite, with chocolate chips arranged in a smiley face. "Morning, buddy," Daniel said softly. Jake didn't blink. Didn't acknowledge him. Just kept staring. Daniel tried again. "I made." "You're not my father," Jake said. His voice was flat. Cold. Practiced. "Stop pretending you belong here." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Daniel's hand tightened around the spatula. His jaw flexed once, but he didn't yell. Didn't defend himself. He just set Jake's plate down gently and walked toward the garage. I felt heat behind my eyes. Shame for Daniel. Anger at Jake. And underneath it all, terror, because my 11-year-old had just weaponized grief, and I didn't know how to disarm him. Daniel paused at the door and said something that made my stomach drop. "I've been doing this wrong." Then the garage door opened, and he disappeared inside. At midnight, I heard power tools humming in the garage. For 3 weeks straight, Daniel became a ghost who still paid bills. He'd wake before dawn, kiss my forehead, and vanish into that garage with coffee and determination. When I asked what he was doing, he'd just smile faintly and say, "Working on something important." That was it. No details. No timeline. Jake noticed immediately. My son tracked Daniel's absence like a security camera, and the less Daniel appeared, the more Jake's shoulders relaxed, like he'd successfully expelled an intruder. It twisted my stomach into knots. Daniel moved in 8 months ago because we were building something real. He never forced the dad label. Never even called himself a stepfather. He introduced himself to people as Natalie's partner. But Jake's father died when Jake was 7. Not divorce. Not abandonment. Death. Final and sacred. The kind of loss a child guards like a fortress. To Jake, Daniel wasn't a new person in our lives. He was a threat to his father's memory. One Saturday, I went into the garage looking for tape and found sawdust everywhere. Mountains of it. And behind old paint cans, a long wooden beam, freshly cut and sanded smooth. I stared at it like evidence of a crime. When I turned around, Jake stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed, suspicious. He pointed at the beam. "What's he doing?" Before I could answer, he ran back inside. That night, Daniel's phone lit up with dozens of saved carpentry videos. By week 4, our house felt like a Cold War zone. Jake wouldn't eat if Daniel cooked. If Daniel handed him water, Jake would leave it untouched and get his own. If Daniel asked about school, Jake would answer the ceiling. The worst part wasn't the rudeness. It was how calculated it felt. Like Jake had decided, if I make him invisible, he'll leave. And Daniel kept showing up anyway. He washed dishes without sighing. Fixed broken things. Replaced batteries. Quiet, constant acts Jake refused to see. One evening, I caught Jake on his gaming headset, laughing with friends. "Yeah, my mom's boyfriend lives here, but he's not family. I don't even talk to him." Daniel was in the hallway holding folded laundry. He heard everything. Jake didn't look guilty. He stared Daniel down like, "See? I can say it out loud, and you still can't do anything." I expected Daniel to snap, to finally lose his patience. Instead, he set the laundry down calmly and said, "You don't have to like me, but you can't be cruel." Jake rolled his eyes. "Whatever, Daniel." The venom in how he said the name made my chest tighten. Daniel squeezed my shoulder once, a silent promise, and walked away. Later, in bed, he stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I'm not losing this house to an 11-year-old's anger." I didn't know if I should be relieved or terrified. The next morning, my phone rang. Jake's paternal grandmother, "We need to talk about that man." Patricia arrived like thunder in polite clothing. She didn't knock. She rang the bell and walked in like she still had emotional ownership of this house. Jake's face transformed the moment he saw her, softened, relieved. Like he could finally breathe. That reaction alone made guilt crawl up my throat. Patricia was the keeper of Jake's father's memory. She had photo albums, vacuum-sealed shirts, stories she recited like scripture. She hugged Jake too tight, then looked past him at Daniel like he was a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. "So," she said, scanning the living room, the furniture, the life we'd built. "This is the new arrangement." Daniel stood. Polite. Calm. "Hello, Patricia. I'm Daniel." She didn't shake his hand. Didn't even fully face him. She turned to Jake and said loudly, "Nobody can replace your father, sweetheart. Nobody." Jake nodded like she'd just handed him ammunition. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Patricia lowered her voice and leaned toward me. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said with a smile that had teeth. "I'm here because Jake needs stability." I'd learned Patricia's language over the years. Stability meant control. She walked through the house like an inspector, paused at the garage door, sniffed the air. "What's happening out there?" "Nothing," I said too quickly. Patricia smiled like she'd found a thread to pull. "Well, whatever it is, remember, my son would be ashamed if Jake started calling strangers family." My hands went ice cold. I saw it then, clear as a hospital monitor flatline. Patricia wasn't protecting Jake from pain. She was protecting her grief by turning my son into a weapon. At midnight, I found Jake crouched by the garage door, listening. 2 days later, I found a backpack hidden under Jake's bed. Not his school bag. A real packing bag. Inside, granola bars, a flashlight, a framed photo of his father, and his tablet. My heart started hammering so hard I felt it in my ears. I sat on the floor and waited. When Jake walked in, he froze. "What is this?" I asked gently. His lips pressed into a tight line. His eyes avoided mine. "Nothing." "Jake," I said, voice shaking. "Are you planning to run away?" He shrugged like it didn't matter. Like leaving home was casual. Like my heart wasn't splitting open. He whispered, "Grandma said if he finishes whatever he's building, you'll forget Dad completely." I stared at him, stunned. Why would she say that? "Because it's true," Jake snapped. Then his face crumpled for half a second before hardening again. "If I start liking him, Dad's really gone." I reached for him, and he flinched away. That flinch hurt worse than any of his words to Daniel. That night, I called Patricia. I tried to stay calm. Tried to be respectful. She laughed. Actually laughed. "A child knows when a man is buying his way in," she said. "If you were truly loyal to my son, you wouldn't allow this." Loyal. As if my grief had an expiration date matching hers. When I hung up, Daniel was standing in the doorway. He'd heard enough. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved. He knelt beside me and asked one steady question: "Do you trust me to handle this without making him the villain?" I swallowed. "What are you building?" Daniel's mouth twitched. "Something he needs. But not what she thinks." The next morning, the school counselor emailed, "We need to discuss Jake's behavior." The email felt like an accusation dressed in professional language. Jake had never been a problem at school. He was quiet, responsible. The kid teachers called mature for his age, which really means this child has seen too much. So why now? When I asked Jake what happened, he shrugged. "Nothing. Grandma just called them." My stomach dropped. "She called your school?" He lifted his chin. "She's my family." That line hit like a slap. Because I heard what he didn't say, Daniel isn't. That afternoon, Daniel came in from the garage smelling like sawdust and focus. He washed his hands slowly, deliberately calming himself. "School emailed," I told him. He nodded, unsurprised. "Patricia." "How did you know?" "Because she's trying to make you scared," he said simply. "Scared people surrender." I stared at him. "What are you doing, Daniel?" He looked at me, really looked, and his voice went quiet. "I'm doing the only thing that works with a kid who thinks love is betrayal. I'm refusing to compete with a dead man." I didn't know how to respond. That night, Jake refused dinner again. He pushed his plate away. "I don't want to eat his food." Daniel didn't argue. He just wrapped the plate, put it in the fridge, and said calmly, "Okay." Then he added, "You don't owe me affection. You do owe people basic respect." Jake's eyes flashed. "You can't tell me what I owe." Daniel nodded once. I can. In this house. Jake slammed his chair back and ran upstairs. I stood frozen, bracing for Daniel's anger. But Daniel just exhaled and said, almost to himself, that's fine. He heard it. At 2 a.m., I heard a crash, followed by Daniel muttering, no. Start over. The next morning, I found screws dumped into the trash. Not spilled. Deliberately dumped. The drill battery was missing, too. My chest tightened as I walked upstairs. Jake sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, face blank. Do you know where the drill battery is? I asked. He didn't blink. No. The lie was too smooth. I found the battery later, wedged behind the couch cushion like someone had hidden it in a panic. When I showed Daniel, he looked at it, then at me, and instead of anger, he smiled faintly. His testing, Daniel said. Testing what? I whispered. If I'm going to punish him for being scared. My throat tightened. Are you? Daniel shook his head. No. But I'm not pretending it's okay either. He walked upstairs, knocked once on Jake's door, and spoke through it, calm, firm. I noticed my tools were moved. I'm not angry. But you don't touch what isn't yours. If you're curious, you can ask. If you're angry, you can say you're angry. You don't sabotage. Silence. Then Jake yelled, whatever. Daniel didn't argue. He just walked away. Later, I caught Jake watching Daniel from the hallway as Daniel carried wood back into the garage like he was assembling pieces of a puzzle. Jake's eyes narrowed, but something new flickered there. Not warmth. Not acceptance. Something worse for a kid trying to hold control. Curiosity. That evening, Jake's phone lit up with a text from Patricia. Check what is building. It's not for you. I didn't mean to see the text. I was handing Jake his jacket when his screen flashed. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Jake's shoulders went rigid. What's not for you? I asked softly. He pulled the phone to his chest like a shield. Nothing. Jake, I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. Did Grandma say something about Daniel? His eyes flicked away. She said he's doing something in the garage and you won't tell me because you picked his side. I felt bitter heat rise in my chest. There are no sides. Jake's voice cracked. Yes, there are. And you chose him. That sentence sliced deeper than anything he'd said to Daniel, because it wasn't rejection. It was accusation. I crouched in front of him. I didn't replace your dad. And I'm not replacing you. He blinked hard. Then why do you want him here? Before I could answer, he shoved past me and ran to his room. I followed and found him rummaging through drawers, yanking out clothes, stuffing them into that same backpack. My heart stopped. Jake. He snapped, if he's taking over, I'm leaving first. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Then Daniel appeared in the doorway. He took one look at the half-packed bag, the wild fear in Jake's eyes, and he didn't scold. Didn't lecture. He just said calmly, okay, now I understand. Jake glared. Understand what? Daniel's voice softened. That you think love is a zero-sum game. Jake's face twisted with confusion. Daniel nodded as if confirming an internal decision. Fine. Then I'll speak in a language you can't argue with. He walked away toward the garage. The next day, a delivery truck dropped off lumber, and Jake watched from the window like it was a threat. That week, Daniel changed tactics, not by punishing Jake, but by changing the atmosphere. He stopped trying in ways Jake could reject. He didn't suggest game nights. Didn't ask about Minecraft. Didn't offer homework help. He simply existed. Cooked. Cleaned. Worked. Built. When Jake tried to provoke him, slamming doors, muttering insults, Daniel didn't react emotionally. He reacted like a steady adult. One night, Jake called him that guy at the dinner table, right in front of me. Daniel set his fork down. Calm. No. Jake blinked. No what? No more disrespect, Daniel said. You can call me Daniel. You can call me your mom's partner. But you don't dehumanize me. Jake's voice rose. You can't tell me what to do. Daniel nodded once. I can in this house. And I will. Jake's eyes flashed with rage, then he shoved his chair back and stormed away. I expected Daniel to look wounded. Instead, he looked almost relieved, as if the boundary was a foundation. Later, I found Daniel on the couch with his laptop. On the screen, woodworking forums, plans, measurements, questions like reinforcing loft bed frame safely and hidden storage under platform. My throat tightened. He really was building something. And it wasn't just wood. It was a message. That night, as I passed the hallway, I heard Daniel on the phone, voice low. I'm doing it even if he never thanks me. He needs to see a man can stay without being worshipped. I paused, hand on the wall, chest aching. Daniel wasn't trying to win Jake's love. He was modeling something Jake had never learned, safety that doesn't demand payment. The next morning, Jake slipped into the garage when he thought no one was watching. I found Jake sitting on the garage step, frozen. Not touching anything. Just staring. Inside, the project had taken shape, wooden beams laid out like a skeleton of something substantial. A ladder frame propped against the wall. A platform outline. A bracket for mounting something. Jake's eyes were wide in a way I hadn't seen in months. Daniel walked in behind me, stopped when he saw Jake, and didn't startle him. He said softly, "You can look. You just can't touch unless you ask." Jake didn't move. "What is it?" Daniel shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, which somehow made it bigger. "Something for your room." Jake blinked. "Why?" Daniel glanced at him. "Because you live here." Jake's mouth opened and closed. He looked like he'd expected a trick answer. A bribe. Daniel didn't give one. He just went back to sanding a plank, movements slow and confident. Jake stared another moment, then backed out like he was afraid to want it. That night, I found Jake in his room on his tablet, watching carpentry videos. When he noticed me, he slammed the screen off and snapped, "I was just." I didn't see anything. I lied gently. He stared at me, suspicious. Then he whispered, almost like he hated saying it, "Is it like a treehouse?" My throat tightened. "I think so." Jake swallowed. "He can't build that." I thought it was doubt. But as he turned away, I realized it wasn't doubt. It was fear. Because if Daniel built something beautiful, Jake might feel something warm. And warmth would threaten the fortress he'd built around his father's memory. 2 days later, Patricia showed up again, with a smile that told me she decided to ruin it. Patricia walked into my house like she was entering a courtroom she expected to win. She kissed Jake, glanced toward the garage, and said, "So, I hear someone's doing carpentry." Jake's eyes flicked to Daniel, quick and guilty. Daniel didn't look up from the coffee he was pouring. "Hello, Patricia." She ignored him and crouched beside Jake. "Your father was good with his hands, you know. He would have built you something incredible." Jake nodded, eyes shining with complicated emotion. I saw it then, Patricia's strategy. She was going to take Daniel's action and tie it to her son. She was going to steal the meaning from it, so even if Jake loved it, he wouldn't be allowed to love Daniel for it. I braced for Daniel to correct her. He didn't. He simply said, calm and steady, "He sounds like he was a good father." Patricia blinked, thrown off. She'd come ready for a fight, and Daniel refused to step into the ring. Patricia stood, eyes narrowing. Jake needs his family, not a man playing house. Daniel's gaze lifted. Jake needs stability. "You're right." The way he said it, agreeing but not yielding, made my skin prickle. Patricia leaned close to me near the sink. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "If he finishes whatever he's building, you'll lose Jake. He'll forget who his real father was." My jaw clenched. That's not how love works. Patricia's smile stayed sweet. "It is when you're being replaced." She turned and left like she'd planted a bomb. After she was gone, Jake stood in the hallway, staring at the garage door like it held a secret he wanted and feared. Then he whispered, barely audible, "Is he really doing it for me?" Daniel's voice came from the kitchen. "Yeah, kid. I am." Jake froze. Daniel added quietly, "And you don't have to say anything about it." Jake's throat bobbed. Then he ran upstairs. The next day, the school counselor called directly, "We're concerned about what Jake's been saying." At the school, the counselor's office smelled like stale coffee and laminated motivation posters. The counselor, Ms. Foster, greeted me kindly, but her eyes had that careful focus professionals use when they think a child might be unsafe. Jake has been saying he feels pressured at home, she said gently, that he doesn't feel heard. My stomach dropped. Pressured how? Ms. Foster hesitated. He said an adult male in the home is trying to replace his father. I gripped my purse so hard my fingers hurt. Patricia. This was Patricia's work. I would never allow that, I said, voice shaking. Daniel has never asked Jake to call him Dad. He's been patient beyond reason. Ms. Foster nodded slowly. Would Daniel be willing to attend a meeting? Sometimes it helps children to see adults united. I swallowed. Yes. On the way home, Jake walked beside me like a stranger. He didn't look scared. He looked defiant, like he'd made a move in a game. When we got in the car, he said, "Grandma said you'd pick him." I turned to him, heart pounding. "Jake, did Grandma tell you to say those things at school?" He stared out the window. "She said if I don't, you'll forget Dad. And then it's my fault." I went cold. That's what made me shake. Not the cruelty. Not the rejection. The responsibility. The way grief had been turned into a job my child was terrified to fail. That night, Daniel listened without interrupting as I told him everything. When I finished, he didn't curse Patricia. Didn't rage. He simply said, "She's trying to create a record." My eyes widened. A record for what? Daniel's expression sharpened. For court. For custody. For making you look unstable. My breath caught. Daniel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't panic. We fight her with consistency, not noise." Then he stood, walked toward the garage, and said, "I'm finishing it this weekend." My throat tightened. "What if she stops you?" Daniel paused, looked back, and said quietly, "Let her try." The next morning, I found an official-looking letter in my mailbox, Patricia requesting family time adjustments. Patricia didn't just threaten. She performed. At the school meeting, she showed up uninvited, wearing a cardigan and that expression that says I'm the reasonable one here. The counselor looked surprised. Are you Jake's guardian?" Patricia smiled. "I'm his grandmother. His father's mother. Someone needs to speak for the child." My throat tightened. Daniel sat beside me, hands folded, calm. Jake sat across from us, staring at the carpet. Ms. Foster asked Jake gently, "Can you tell us how you feel at home?" Jake's voice was small but rehearsed. "I don't want Daniel in my life." The words slammed into my chest. Daniel's face didn't change. That was almost worse. Because it meant he expected it. Patricia patted Jake's shoulder like she'd coached a perfect performance. Ms. Foster glanced between us. "Jake, who told you to say that?" Jake's head snapped up. For a second, panic flickered in his eyes, like a kid caught cheating. Then he looked at me with sudden anger. "Nobody. I just don't want him." My heart broke in slow motion. Daniel leaned forward slightly, voice calm. "Jake, you can feel whatever you feel. But we don't lie to hurt people." Jake flinched like Daniel had slapped him. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "How dare you accuse my grandson of lying?" Daniel looked at her evenly. "I'm not accusing him. I'm protecting him." The counselor's gaze sharpened. After the meeting, in the hallway, Patricia cornered me. Her smile vanished. "If you keep pushing him, I'll make sure you lose him." My mouth went dry. "You would take Jake from me?" Patricia's eyes gleamed. "I would rescue him from confusion." Daniel stepped closer, just one step, but it changed the air. Patricia's gaze slid to him, contempt curling her lip. Daniel's voice was quiet. "You're not rescuing anyone. You're recruiting him." Patricia's face tightened. "His blood." Daniel nodded once. "And he's a child." Then Daniel turned away, as if Patricia wasn't worth more words. Jake watched him go, face unreadable. In the car, Jake said suddenly, almost in a whisper, "What if Dad thinks I'm replacing him?" I realized then, Jake wasn't a villain. He was a kid drowning in loyalty fear. That night, I found a folded note on Jake's desk, Daniel's handwriting. The note was simple. No guilt. No begging. No speech about being a family. Just 5 lines. You don't owe me love. You don't owe me a title. You don't have to choose me over your dad. But you do owe people basic respect. I'll keep showing up anyway. I stared at it until my eyes burned. Jake found me holding it and snatched it like I'd stolen something private. He crumpled it in his fist, jaw clenched. Then, later, when he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him uncrumple it and smooth it out on his desk like it mattered. That tiny moment did something to me. It gave me hope, dangerous hope. The next day, I came home early and heard something strange, soft humming from the garage. Daniel wasn't just building. He was happy, focused, like the work was feeding him. I peeked in and saw a loft platform nearly complete, sturdy beams, clean joints, storage cubbies built into the base. It wasn't a rushed gift. It was craftsmanship. My throat tightened because I knew what it cost him. Time, money, energy, the risk of failure, without any guarantee Jake would even care. Daniel wiped sweat from his forehead and noticed me. "How's it looking?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I laughed through tears. "Like you're insane." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, probably." From the hallway, a floorboard creaked. Jake stood there, watching, trying to look indifferent, failing. Daniel didn't pounce on the moment. He didn't ask if Jake liked it. He just nodded toward the ladder frame. "If you want it to feel more like a treehouse, I can add side rails." Jake's voice came out small. "Can you?" Then he stopped, as if asking was too vulnerable. Daniel didn't push. "Think about it. No pressure." Jake backed away, but his eyes stayed glued to the build like it had become a door he might walk through. That Friday, Daniel said, "Tonight. After dinner. I'm showing him." It was raining the way Seattle rains, steady, soft, like the sky is thinking. After dinner, Daniel washed his hands, then looked at Jake. "I made something," he said. "You can ignore me if you want. But you shouldn't miss this." Jake's chin lifted, defiant. "I don't care." Daniel nodded. "Okay." Then he walked to Jake's bedroom door, opened it, and stepped aside like a host revealing a surprise. Jake took one step in, then another, and then he stopped completely. The loft took up one side of the room, sturdy, elevated, with a cozy bed tucked above like a nest. Built-in storage below. A mounted bracket for screens. Cable management so it wouldn't look messy. Even LED strips tucked cleanly into the frame like something from a gaming showcase, not a kid's room. It looked like a treehouse and a gamer's dream combined. Jake didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes shone. Then he swallowed hard and whispered, voice rough, "Why would you do this?" Daniel didn't smile like he'd won. Didn't act like Jake owed him anything. He just said, "Because you live here." Jake's face twisted like he wanted to cry and hated himself for it. He climbed the ladder in one fast movement and disappeared into the loft without another word. I waited for him to come back down and reject it out of principle. Instead, I heard a quiet sound above us, the rustle of blankets, the click of a controller. Jake was setting up. Daniel's shoulders loosened like he'd been holding his breath for months. He looked at me, eyes wet, and I realized this wasn't just for Jake. This was Daniel proving something to himself too, that he could give without being chosen, that he could love without owning. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Then my phone buzzed. Patricia. Her text was short, "What did he buy Jake?" I stared at it, blood running cold. The next morning, Patricia showed up at my door unannounced, eyes fixed on Jake's room. Patricia walked in like she'd been invited. Jake was in his loft, half hidden behind the side rail, controller in hand. For the first time in months, he looked peaceful. Patricia saw it immediately. Her eyes narrowed like she'd spotted a rival. "What is this?" she demanded, staring up at the loft. Jake didn't answer. Daniel stepped forward calmly. "A loft bed. Storage. Gaming setup. Safer than it looks." Patricia scoffed. "So you're buying his love?" Daniel's eyes stayed steady. "No." Patricia's laugh was sharp. "Then what? You think building him a toy makes you his father?" Jake's shoulders stiffened. I held my breath, terrified Daniel would fall into the trap, defend himself, argue, claim space in Jake's heart. Instead, Daniel said quietly, "I'm not his father." Patricia blinked, thrown. Daniel continued, voice calm, "I'm the adult in his home who shows up." Jake's grip tightened on the controller. Patricia's gaze flicked to Jake, searching for agreement. "Your dad should be the only man who matters," she said, honeyed and poisonous. Jake didn't nod, didn't speak. But his silence wasn't obedience anymore. It was protection. Patricia saw it, and her face tightened with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "If you want to play house, then Jake will spend weekends with me. He needs real family." My heart lurched. "You don't get to decide that." Patricia smiled coldly. "We'll see what a judge says." Jake's head whipped around. "A judge?" Patricia softened her tone instantly. "Just grown-up talk, sweetheart." But Jake's eyes widened with fear. Fear of losing me. Fear of being torn between loyalty and home. Patricia had crossed a line. Daniel stepped closer to me, not touching, just present, and said softly, "Patricia, leave." She stared at him like she couldn't believe he'd spoken to her that way. Then she leaned toward me and whispered, "He's not worth losing your son." And she walked out. Jake stared after her, shaking. Then he climbed down from the loft slowly and said something that made my stomach drop, "If she takes me, it's my fault." I pulled him into my arms before he could flinch away. Daniel turned toward the garage with hard calm in his eyes. That night, Daniel opened his laptop and said, "We need to document everything." Daniel made a folder. Screenshots. Messages. Dates. Times. Every text Patricia sent. Every email from school. Every note from the counselor. I watched, stunned. This feels extreme. Daniel's jaw tightened. What's extreme is using an 11-year-old's grief as a legal strategy. My throat tightened. Do you really think she'd take me to court? Daniel looked at me, serious. I think she'd threaten it to scare you. And if you flinch, she'll push harder. The next morning, Jake came down with dark circles under his eyes. He didn't greet Daniel. But he didn't insult him either. Progress. At dinner, Jake hovered near the loft, pretending he didn't care that Daniel was in the room. Then he climbed up and stayed there for hours. Later, I passed his room and heard him talking on headset, voice lower than usual. He built it, Jake said. Like, with his hands. Pause. Then Jake's voice shifted. Grandma says he's trying to replace my dad. Long pause again. And then Jake said something that made my eyes sting, but he never says that. He just keeps showing up. My throat tightened. I backed away so he wouldn't know I'd heard. In the living room, Daniel looked up from his laptop as if he sensed the change in the air. I didn't tell him what Jake said. I didn't want him to carry hope like a burden. But Daniel's mouth twitched, like he already knew something had moved. That weekend, Jake went to Patricia's for the first mandatory weekend. He came back quieter, tense, like he'd been scrubbed with guilt. He walked past the loft without looking at it. And when Daniel said calmly, "Hey," Jake didn't answer. My stomach sank. Patricia had counterattacked. That night, I found Jake crying behind the loft curtain, silent tears, shoulders shaking. I sat on the floor beneath him and whispered, "Talk to me." He choked out, "Grandma said if I like it, I'm disloyal." My heart broke. Up on the loft, the thing that was supposed to be joy had become a battleground. Daniel stood in the doorway, listening, hands clenched at his sides. Then he said something that startled me with its steadiness. Patricia doesn't get to define loyalty. Jake sniffed. You don't get to either. Daniel nodded. You're right. He stepped closer and said softly, you get to. Jake went still. And I saw it, the first time my son understood that Daniel wasn't trying to take control. He was trying to give it back. The next day, Jake asked Daniel the most dangerous question. Did you know my dad? Jake asked it in the kitchen, like he was testing a wire that might shock him. Did you know my dad? He said, eyes fixed on the counter. Daniel froze for half a second, just enough to show the question mattered. Then he answered carefully. No, I didn't. Jake's jaw tightened. Then stop acting like you can be here. Daniel nodded, absorbing the hit without flinching. Okay. Jake blinked, thrown. Okay. Daniel's voice stayed calm. You asked if I knew him. I didn't. But I know what he means to you. Jake swallowed. You don't know anything. Daniel looked at him gently. I know you're afraid that liking me means losing him. Jake's eyes flashed. I'm not afraid. Daniel didn't argue. Okay. Jake's fists clenched. Why do you keep saying okay? Daniel's mouth twitched slightly. Because I'm not going to wrestle you into agreeing with me. Jake stared at him, confused and angry, like he couldn't find the usual buttons to push. Daniel continued, voice quiet, I'm not here to erase your dad. I'm here to be an adult who stays. That's all. Jake's throat bobbed. Then why do you keep trying? Daniel paused, and I felt the weight of the moment like a held breath. Then Daniel said something I'll never forget, because I won't let grief turn you into someone who hurts people to feel safe. Jake flinched. Not because it was cruel. Because it was true. His face went tight, like he was trying to stop a tear. Then he bolted upstairs to the loft and disappeared. Daniel didn't follow. Didn't chase the moment. He just went back to rinsing dishes like the kitchen wasn't full of invisible heartbreak. I watched him and felt my eyes sting. This was Daniel's revenge. Not getting even. Getting steady. Refusing to be pushed out. Refusing to let a child's pain become the ruler of our home. That night, I found Daniel in the garage again, not building, but sanding a small piece of wood. What's that? I asked. Daniel glanced up. Controller rack. And I'm engraving Jake's gamer tag. My throat tightened. You're still giving him more? Daniel nodded. Because he's still here. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Jake stood in the hallway, staring at the piece of wood in Daniel's hands. He didn't speak. But he didn't walk away either. Jake stepped into the garage and said, almost grudging, that shelf is crooked. Daniel didn't smile. Didn't act like he'd won a prize because Jake spoke to him. He simply handed Jake a measuring tape. Fix it then. Jake stared at the tape like it was a live wire. He took it slowly. Daniel stepped aside, giving him space, giving him dignity. Jake measured the board with intense focus, lips pressed tight. It's off by like a quarter inch, he muttered. Daniel nodded. Good eye. Jake's cheeks reddened slightly, like praise was embarrassing. Daniel didn't overdo it. He just said, want to mark where it needs to be cut. Jake hesitated, then nodded once. My breath caught. This wasn't a warm hug. This was something more valuable for a child who'd been living in defense mode, participation. And participation is the seed of respect. For the next 20 minutes, Jake helped. He didn't laugh. Didn't chat. But he stayed. Patricia arrived midway through, unannounced again, like she was checking the temperature of her control. She stepped into the garage and froze at the sight, Jake holding a pencil, marking wood beside Daniel. Her face tightened. Jake. What are you doing? Jake didn't look up. Helping. Patricia's voice sharpened. Why? Jake's hand paused. Patricia aimed her tone like a blade. Do you think your dad would want you doing projects with him? The air turned cold. My stomach dropped. I expected Jake to crumble. Instead, Jake lifted his head and said, quiet but firm, stop saying that. Patricia blinked like she'd been slapped. What did you say? Jake's voice shook, but he repeated it. Stop saying that. Dad is dad. This is just a shelf. Patricia's eyes flashed with fury. She turned to me. You're poisoning him. You're turning him against his father. My voice finally came out steady. No. You are. Patricia's smile vanished. If you don't end this, I will take you to court. Daniel stood up fully, calm eyes locked on her. Do it. And the judge will see exactly what you've been doing. Patricia's face tightened. Because she hadn't expected Daniel to be ready. She stormed out, but not before throwing one last line over her shoulder. Jake will choose blood in the end. The garage door shut behind her with a bang. Jake stared at the floor, shaking. Then he whispered, barely audible, what if she makes me? Daniel set the measuring tape down gently and said, calm as a promise, she can't make you choose fear. 2 days later, I got an email notification, court filing inquiry, Carter family. The court filing inquiry email was a bluff, but it worked. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Daniel read it, face calm. It's just an inquiry, not a filing. My voice cracked. Still, what if she does it? Daniel's eyes stayed steady. Then we don't panic. We prepare. That night, Jake didn't play games in the loft. He sat up there quietly, staring at the wall. I went up, sat beside him, and whispered, "You okay?" He swallowed. "Grandma says if I don't go with her, I'm bad." My throat tightened. "You're not bad." Jake whispered, "Dad would be disappointed." And then he finally said the truth that made my chest hurt, "I don't know how to love you and keep Dad." I wrapped my arms around him and whispered into his hair, "You don't lose someone by loving someone else." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. Downstairs, Daniel was in the kitchen, writing something. When I asked what, he showed me a simple schedule, a list of house rules, a record of Jake's routines, a statement of Daniel's role, not father, not replacement, adult support, partner to Natalie. It wasn't cold. It was protective. "This is what stability looks like," Daniel said. "If Patricia tries to twist things, we show reality." I stared at him. "You're really ready to fight?" Daniel's voice was quiet. "I'm ready to not be bullied out of a child's home." The next morning, Jake came downstairs, stood near Daniel awkwardly, and said something that didn't sound like him, "You can show me how you did the rails." Daniel blinked once, surprised, but he didn't act excited. He just nodded. "Tomorrow. After school." Jake's lips twitched, almost like relief. And as he walked away, he muttered, so low I barely heard, "Thanks for the loft." My breath caught. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't "I love you." But it was the first unprompted thank you. Daniel didn't respond dramatically. He just said softly, "You're welcome." And Jake didn't flinch. That afternoon, Patricia showed up at Jake's school, without telling me. The call came from the front office. "Ms. Carter, Jake's grandmother is here to pick him up." My heart stopped. "She's not authorized." There was a pause. "She's listed as emergency contact." I went cold. Patricia had been listed years ago, before Daniel, before I understood how manipulation could wear kindness as a mask. "I'm coming now," I said, voice tight. I drove like my lungs weren't in my body. When I arrived, I saw Patricia in the office, calm as a sermon, holding Jake's coat. Jake looked panicked. His eyes locked onto mine like he was drowning. Patricia smiled. "Natalie, I'm just helping." I stepped forward. "You don't pick up my child without permission." Patricia's voice turned sweet for the staff. "Of course. I just worry about him." Jake's voice cracked. "Grandma said." Patricia cut him off quickly. "Nothing, sweetheart." I looked at the secretary. "Remove her as emergency contact. Today." Patricia's eyes flashed with anger, but she kept her smile for the audience. As we walked out, Jake's hand slipped into mine like a child again, not a soldier. In the car, Jake whispered, terrified, "She said if I don't come with her, she'll tell everyone you're a bad mom." My throat tightened. "She can say whatever she wants. It doesn't make it true." Jake stared at the dashboard. "She said Daniel will leave anyway." My chest tightened, because part of me feared that too. At home, Daniel listened to everything, eyes darkening, not with rage, but with clarity. Then he walked to the front door, locked it, and said quietly, "We're done playing nice." I blinked. "What does that mean?" Daniel looked at me. "It means boundaries. Real ones. Legal ones." That night, he drafted a written notice. Patricia no longer allowed to pick Jake up, no unscheduled visits, communication in writing only. It wasn't cruel. It was firm. Jake watched from the hallway, quiet. Later, he climbed into his loft and called down, "Daniel." Daniel paused at the ladder. "Yeah?" Jake hesitated, then said, small, "You're not my dad." Daniel nodded. "I know." Jake swallowed. "But you don't leave." Daniel's voice softened. "No, I don't." Jake's eyes flicked away, like emotion was too bright. Then he whispered something that shook me, "Okay." And for the first time, okay wasn't a rejection. It was an agreement to try. The next morning, an envelope appeared on my porch, Patricia's lawyer letter. The letter wasn't technically from a lawyer. It was from a family advocate, full of threats wrapped in concern. Words like grandparent rights, child welfare, unstable household environment. My hands shook as I read. Daniel read it too, then exhaled slowly. This is intimidation, not law. I swallowed. It still scares me. Daniel nodded. That's the point. He opened a folder on his laptop and calmly added the letter to the records. Then he did something I didn't expect. He printed out a photo. It was Jake's loft, clean, safe, sturdy, and Jake sitting inside it, reading, not even gaming, just calm. This, Daniel said quietly, is what stability looks like. Jake walked in mid-sentence. He saw the letter in my hands and froze. Is she taking me? I rushed to him. No. Nobody is taking you. Jake's eyes went to Daniel like he needed to hear it twice. Daniel crouched, level with him. You're staying here. This is your home. Jake swallowed hard. But Grandma said. Daniel cut in gently. Grandma says a lot of things because she's scared. But her fear doesn't get to drive your life. Jake stared at him, conflicted. Then Jake asked, voice small, are you going to make me call you Dad? Daniel's expression softened. No. Never. Jake's breath trembled out. Daniel added quietly, I don't want a title. I want respect. And you've been doing better. Jake looked away, embarrassed. Then he did something that made my heart stop. He reached down, picked up the measuring tape from the table, the same one from the garage, and held it out to Daniel. Can we finish the shelf? He mumbled. Daniel took the tape carefully, like it was sacred. Yeah, we can. In the garage, Jake worked silently, focused. Daniel guided without controlling. It was the first time I saw them side by side without tension spiking the air. And that was the real action. Not the loft. Not the shelf. The quiet choice to build together. In the doorway, I wiped my eyes. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered and a woman's voice said, clipped and official. This is regarding a petition filed by Patricia Carter. The voice continued, you've been served. I didn't breathe until Daniel took the phone from my shaking hand and asked calm questions. Who filed? What was the claim? When was the hearing? When he hung up, he looked at me and said steadily, okay. That word again. But this time it wasn't acceptance of pain. It was activation. He pulled up a list of family law clinics. He booked a consultation. He gathered our documentation. He didn't promise me it would be easy. He promised me we wouldn't be unprepared. Jake overheard enough to understand what was happening. That night, he stood at the bottom of the stairs, face pale. Is Grandma mad because of me? My heart broke. No. Grandma is mad because she's losing control. Jake's eyes filled. I didn't want her to fight. Daniel stepped forward, voice calm. Jake, none of this is your fault. Jake whispered, but I started it. Daniel shook his head. No. You were a kid grieving. Adults should have protected you from being used. Jake flinched at the word used. Because it landed. 2 days later, we sat in a legal clinic office with a volunteer attorney who scanned the petition and sighed. She's pushing for visitation and alleging emotional instability, the attorney said. Do you have records? Daniel slid a folder across the table. Screenshots. Dates. The school meeting notes. Proof she showed up uninvited. Proof she tried to pick Jake up. The attorney's eyebrows lifted. This is very organized. Daniel nodded. I'm not trying to take a child from his grandmother. I'm trying to stop a grandmother from using a child as leverage. The attorney leaned back. That framing matters. A lot. On the way home, Jake was quiet. Then, in the car, he whispered, voice trembling, Grandma said you'd leave because I'm mean. Daniel glanced at him in the rearview mirror, calm eyes steady. I'm still here. Jake stared at the window for a long time. Then he whispered, almost like he was admitting defeat, okay. My chest hurt with it. Because my child was learning the hardest lesson of all, that love isn't a test you pass once. It's something you practice. The night before the hearing, Patricia left a voicemail. Jake will choose blood in front of the judge. I barely slept. Jake barely ate. Daniel moved through the morning like a man carrying a fragile glass bowl, careful, steady, determined not to drop it. At the courthouse, Patricia arrived wearing her sweetest face, holding a folder like she was the injured party. She hugged Jake dramatically. Sweetheart, you don't have to be scared, she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Jake stiffened. Inside the hearing room, the judge listened to Patricia speak about concern and confusion and a man living in the home. When the judge asked Jake if he wanted to speak, my heart stopped. Jake stood slowly. His hands shook. Patricia smiled, confident. Jake looked at me first, eyes wet. Then he looked at Daniel. The room held its breath. I miss my dad, Jake said, voice cracking. And Grandma says if I like Daniel, then Dad is gone. Patricia's smile faltered. Jake continued, swallowing hard. But Daniel never said that. He never told me to call him Dad. He built me something. The judge's gaze sharpened. Built you something? Jake nodded, voice small. A loft. Like a treehouse. Patricia snapped, that's bribery. The judge raised a hand. Let the child speak. Jake's throat bobbed. I was mean. I said he didn't live here. But he still made it. And he still makes dinner. He still. His voice broke. He wiped his face hard, embarrassed. Then he said the sentence that made the entire room change. He's not my dad. Patricia's smile returned, triumphant, until Jake finished, but here's my home. Silence. The judge looked at Patricia with a calm expression that did not favor her. Grandparent relationships matter, the judge said, but they cannot be forced through manipulation and threats. Patricia's face tightened. The judge ruled for structured visitation, boundaries, and, most importantly, no unauthorized school contact. Outside the courthouse, Patricia hissed at me, this isn't over. Daniel stepped between us, quiet, not aggressive, just blocking her like a wall. Patricia's eyes flashed, then she walked away. In the car, Jake stared at his hands. Then he whispered, I didn't want to hurt her. Daniel nodded. You didn't. You told the truth. Jake exhaled shakily. And then, without looking at Daniel, he whispered, thanks. My throat tightened so hard I couldn't speak. Daniel's voice was soft. You're welcome. That night, at home, Jake climbed into the loft and called down, can you show me how you built it? Jake's voice from the loft was small but clear. Daniel. Daniel paused at the bottom of the ladder. Yeah? Jake swallowed. Can you show me how you built it? Daniel didn't rush up. Didn't turn it into a dramatic moment. He just stood there for a second like he was choosing the safest way to answer. Then he said, gentle, yeah, tomorrow. Jake blinked. Why not now? Daniel's mouth twitched slightly. Because it's late. And because I don't want you to feel like you have to do big emotional stuff all at once. Jake's shoulders loosened. That was Daniel's gift, even now, space. No pressure. No debt. Jake nodded once. Okay. I stood in the doorway, watching, heart so full it hurt. Later, I found Daniel in the kitchen rinsing a mug. I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist. I didn't know if we'd make it, I whispered. Daniel exhaled slowly. Me neither. I pulled back and looked at him. Why did you build it? Daniel's eyes softened. Because he needed something that didn't ask him to choose. And because I needed to prove to myself that I could stay even when I wasn't wanted. My throat tightened. Upstairs, Jake shifted in the loft. I heard the soft click of his controller shutting off. Then, almost shyly, he called down again, Daniel. Daniel looked up. Yeah? Jake hesitated, then said the biggest thing he could manage without breaking, good night. Daniel's face stilled. His voice came out warm and steady. Good night, Jake. I stood there, hand over my mouth, because that was the real victory. Not a forced bond. Not a replacement. Just a child learning that love doesn't erase the past, it builds a safer future, one quiet action at a time.